everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I am your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love to set aside time to think about cards and have peace when I do so. And I just like to do that. And this is where I am. We're in Card Talk.
Sounds like you've thought about that a lot here.
I did have some time to think about it. Yes, I did. Right. And, Grant's not along for the ride on this episode, but we'll get him next time. And there's a few other things that I've had some time to reflect upon and think about. And David, those are our patrons. I thought about them very recently.
Yes. Our patrons are definitely responsible for giving us a little bit of peace of mind. So thank you to everybody who sees fit to give a little monthly donation to our podcast that we run here. It's because of your donations that the lights stay on here and we're able to bring you awesome content and awesome episodes and awesome swag. So we're in this weird nebulous recording / release time where you may have gotten the swag or you may have known that it's been delayed a little bit, or you may have been wondering where it is. But anyway, next year's swag, 2021 swag, is going to be off the chain because we have so many awesome patrons. So that said, I would like to give a shout out to all 21 of our patrons, including Carl, Daniel, David, Jake, James, Jason, Joseph, Joshua, Justin, Kyle, Lou, Matt, Mike, Tom, Niall, Phil, Robert, Russ, Sean, Steve, and Vardane. So thank you to all those lovely folks. And I'm actually going to give a specific shout out to Jason, who was a guest on our show way back in our couples February, and his wife Sarah was on the show. So I think Jason and Sarah were definitely they're together in their patronage of the show. So I guess technically we have 22 patrons. That said, Ted,
thanks everyone.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice that people appreciate what we do, right?
Today's episode, David, is about a card, and this may shock you, but it's going to be peace and thought. Would you be kind enough to read this to us?
Sure. Peace and Thought is a 1-cost lore event, and it is a refresh action. Don't forget about that being a refresh action, because when to play, I'll toss it over to Ted, and that'll be something important to talk about. But it's very simple. It's just exhaust 2 heroes to draw 5 cards. Then there's a word wall of flavor text about peace and thought. And no show about peace and thought would be complete if I didn't actually give a shout out to the Con of the Rings organizer from the Free Men of the North, John, who's been a guest on the show a couple of times.
That's right.
And his handle is peace and thought, and the comma is in there. He keeps the comma in there. So I think I'm just going to start calling him Pat, P-A-T, Peace and Thought. But,
I never thought about calling him that. But yes, I think about John as well, because that's just his handle online.
Yeah. Right.
So we're thinking about you, John.
Yeah. So Ted, let me think about you and toss it over to you, and you can talk. I think you were the one that kind of introduced me or reintroduced me to the card and about how great this is. So Ted, go ahead, talk about Peace and Thought.
Peace and Thought. So it's a card draw effect, an event in lore. No one's really surprised there. So this card has 2 costs. One is the resource cost, and a 1 resource cost for 5 cards is amazing. It's astronomical, the amount of cards you get. And whenever I play this card, I'm like, holy crap, how many cards did I just draw? Like, to draw 5 cards at once, it's immensely satisfying. It's great.
Definitely.
So I recommend trying it out just for that, just to draw 5 cards in one single time. You're almost getting an entire new starting hand for next turn, because a starting hand is 6 cards, and then you're drawing 5, which is just most of that. It's an entire starting hand of cards almost. But the true hidden cost is the refresh action to exhaust 2 heroes.
Right.
Because David, as you were mentioning that this is a refresh action. So the way that the timing of this works is at the beginning of the refresh phase, all players raise their threat. You pass the first player marker, and then all your heroes ready, and then the action window opens up to take refresh actions.
And let's take this back even further, is that the refresh phase is the 7th step of each, or the 7th phase of each turn. So there's a separate refresh phase that happens at the end of the turn. So, and not that this has anything to do with the card we're talking about, but all of those shadow effects that say that the hero or the defending character can't ready until the end of turn, that is really bad because you've missed now the refresh phase, so those characters can't refresh during that phase. So they have to stay exhausted. So so that refresh phase is kind of like, a lot of people kind of combine the refresh phase and the resource phase, which is the first turn or the first phase of the next turn, and they kind of do it all at once. And I mean, most of the time it doesn't matter, but there are times when it does matter, and this is one of those times because, and I don't want to steal much thunder from you because you were talking about it, but I find that I forget.
Nope, it's a good point.
I forget to save the resource because I always combine those things, right? But you don't get the resource until afterwards. So if you don't have any lore resources going into the turn, you can't play it until you finish the next turn because the one turn is up and you don't have any lore resources. But anyways, so that's big picture. But you were talking specifically about the refresh action window.
Yeah, but that's a great point. So the refresh action is the last phase of the turn, and it does commonly get meshed with the planning phase, and you got to be careful not to do that because there are triggers at the end of the round that will occur, and you got to make sure that those are done appropriately. To get to the refresh phase, ready everybody, take any actions in that window, and then resolve any end of round effects that might be in play from quest stages or locations or enemies, and then start the next turn with planning and drawing a card. So that's a very important rules timing thing that's critical of the game, is the timing, how the phases work and the structure.
Right.
So Peace and Thought can be played as a refresh action. So basically what happens is the 2 heroes you're choosing to exhaust to pay for this card, they will not be ready for the next round unless you play some other effect to ready them. So going into the next round, come the quest phase, for that whole next turn, they're going to be exhausted because they didn't ready at the end of the turn prior because you played this card.
Because you played this card, right? And that's a bummer when you're playing with 3 heroes, right, Ted?
It is, or it's a bummer if you're playing with 1 hero in the Grey Wanderer contract, because then you can't even play this card.
Well, you can kind of cheat around that because you can
get
sword
extra
thane,
heroes.
You can sword thane somebody or something.
Sword thane, Thalion,
right?
Are 2 ways,
right?
But what, David? What if you're playing with more than 3 heroes?
No, Ted. See, there's nothing in the game that allows you to play with more than 3 heroes, right, Ted?
There is not, David, because there is a relatively recently released contract that was spoiled in the Fortress of Nirn pack.
Oh, there is something that allows you to play with more than 3 heroes. Oh my God.
There is. You get to play with 4 heroes, David, with a Bond of Friendship contract deck.
And one of them has to be a lore hero, right? Like you can't cheat around not having a lore hero in there.
Yep, a Bond of Friendship deck is built with 4 heroes, and they must be a 50 card deck and there's other rules, restrictions, but you're going to have one hero of each of the 4 spheres.
Right. So I think what Ted is getting at is that, to lose 2 heroes is a huge cost no matter what you're doing. So you really have to make sure you're able to play this and at the right time. But if you're playing a Bond of Friendship deck, that means you still have half of your heroes ready to be able to use them to do whatever you need to do. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say which heroes that you have to exhaust. So there may be a hero that is really good at questing, like Spirit Eowyn, but you only have 1 or 2 willpower in the staging area. So you may not need her this round. You may not have any enemies, so you don't need leadership Eomer or tactics Eomer, I guess. So it goes into like the picking your place, as with most cards. It's important to make sure you play it at the right time, not only like where it says to play it in the refresh phase, but this could also really sink you if you're playing solo and you exhaust 2 of your heroes, and then you turn over a second hill troll, and now you have now you're stuck or something. But I think that if you're playing a Bond of Friendship deck, this is a way better. It's cheaper. The cost is cheaper.
Yes,
what I'm getting
the
to.
Exhaustion cost is cheaper because now instead of exhausting 2/3 of your team, you're only exhausting half of your team.
Right. So it's
in a Bond of Friendship deck,
17% better.
Yeah. So and it's great, and then it's 1 resource too, which if you didn't spend it from earlier that turn, like it's affordable in a Bond of Friendship deck as well because it only costs 1.
Right.
And I think that's 5 cards.
And to be fair, Ted, this is where you reintroduced me to the card. I always knew that Peace and Thought existed, of course, and I was constantly reminded by John's handle. But it's been around since Shadow and Flame, so it's definitely been one of those cards that may have seen its kind of see it and then goes down, or it's always an option in terms of card draw. But if you're playing Hobbits like I do, Drinking Song is just as good for less of a price, so to speak. Maybe not cost, but a price. So, but when you were playing Bond of Friendship, when we were playing together, and then you pull out Peace and Thought, I was like, oh. And you said this is a great card, and I was like, this is a great card. Because you need that card draw, and with a lot of the really good card draw, like Daron's Runes and Drinking Song, you actually have to put cards back. Like Drinking Song, you have to not discard. You have to put your whole hand back in your deck. With Daron's Runes, you draw 2 and then put one of your hand back. It seems to be that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Here you just get 5 cards. Like
you net 5 cards. Yeah, right. You lose the one you pay, and then so I guess you net 4 cards. As opposed to the other cards like Drinking Song and Daron's Runes you mentioned, those are like net 0 cards.
Right. And Dark Knowledge, is that the one, or Deep Knowledge? I don't know, the one that lets you the card draw, the doomed card draw one, like
that's Deep Knowledge. Yep.
Yeah, that's good because you're paying threat to draw.
Right.
But that's only 2 cards?
2 cards, yep.
Yeah,
so you're going to net 1 from playing it, but yeah, you get two new cards essentially.
Right. So, other than the Against the Shadow cycle where you get punished for having cards in your hand, I think that's the one, right? The one with Drew Down Forest and all those things.
Yeah, it's potent because even if a game, is like, even a game, let's say a game is 10 turns and you play 1 Peace and Thought and it's the only card draw you play, you still spent half the game drawing 2 cards a turn.
Right. Right.
And most games with later scenarios are kind of in that longer 8 to 11, it seems like, turn length time, as opposed to earlier in the game when they were a little shorter, like 5, 6, 7.
And then there's Ghost of Framsburg, which is 37
Yep.
rounds.
So 5 cards is quite potent. And the other point I'll make about this card, when it did come out, the number 1 hero I used with it. Can you guess what early hero I used with this card most often? I'll give you a hint. He's not in Sphere.
Oh, he's not in Sphere. I was going to say Bilbo because, I mean, Bilbo. I was going to say because Bilbo's
right.
useless, right?
Bilbo's a great. Well, because he has lower Bilbo has low stats, so if you kind of exhaust him, you're kind of like,
right.
And he's in there just to draw you cards anyway.
Plus, the ability that Bilbo has is regardless if he's exhausted or not.
Right.
So early hero.
Mm-hmm. He's tactics, and he readies.
Oh, Boromir. Right.
Any hero that has self-readying, especially if it's not limited,
and
his is limited.
Koragorn, right?
Yeah, because if you, his is a little bit different
because you have to commit. You have to commit him to the quest in order to ready him.
But
right. So
Boromir, if he's one of your heroes that you exhaust, his ability is once per phase.
Right.
So even in the refresh phase, you can immediately spend a threat to just ready him.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Done. Or anytime during the planning phase or next turn. So any hero with self-readying is really good. Saruman has self-readying because you can ready him by playing Doomed cards. And Idrian has self-readying. That's not limited if you explore a location. So that requires some more planning and finesse, but you can explore a location next turn with a card effect.
Right.
Like Ashfaloth or something.
Right. Lanwin has readying.
Lanwin can't ready if you get a surge. Yeah. So
I'm stretching here.
Yeah. There might be more, but those are probably my top picks. And then one of your favorite archetypes that you like to play that has some built-in readying, sort of to the archetype. The small folk.
The Hobbits. Well, they don't have built-in readying. I mean,
it's not built in.
I mean, Sam does, but it's easier to ready Hobbits with Fast Hitch because there's Fast Hitch and stuff. But and that's also in the lore sphere. So
right. So yeah, Bilbo and Fast Hitch and Peace and Thought, and I'm like, oh, Fast Hitch. You just
right.
Yeah, it's
because Fast Hitch is also it's not restricted to a hero, but it's also not restricted to a phase or anything too. So
yeah, if you didn't use your Fast Hitch that turn,
right?
Like you can, if you had Fast Hitch on Merry, and he only took one action that turn, in the refresh phase you exhaust him,
right?
And then you can, well, I guess actually the Fast Hitch would be ready too, but you can exhaust the Fast Hitch, and then going into the next turn, Mary's ready and only Fast Hitch is exhausted.
Right. And that works out really well. Actually, Mary's action, the Tactics Mary, you're probably talking about Spirit Mary because I know you love Spirit Mary, but Tactics Mary has the ability when you group attack, the other person readies. And I always forget about that. And not that that's a big deal because you're going to already have people that are ready. But so that doesn't even play a role in this card. So I'm just talking. I know where you were Hobbit knowledge, but that's the thing. That's what's so weird about it being a refresh action. And you fell in the same thing with the Fast Hitch. Is the Fast Hitch is going to be ready? And so it's.
You gotta be careful with your writing effects and how to play around it. Mm-hmm. But there's still a lot of just blanket reading effects. Unexpected Courage, Fast Hitch. I mentioned Boromir. A couple. I'm sure there's Prince Imrahil.
Right.
Leadership Prince Imrahil. He can ready if a character leaves play, so you can exhaust him.
Right. Do
some type of sneak attack thing in the quest phase, and then he's ready by combat. There's ways to ready your heroes.
Right. So the question that I have for you, since you're kind of a rules guru of the game, is Beorn is immune to player card effects. So can you use Beorn to pay the cost of a player card?
That's a great question, and the answer is just no. He's immune to it, I think. I feel like that's well, exhaust. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the card has to. I mean, it's not targeting him exactly because certain things about Bjorn are immune. Like they've
Right.
ruled that his resource pool
Right.
is not immune to player card effects. It's like
Right.
separate from
Right.
him.
Same with his damage tokens. So you can honor guard and protect his damage tokens and stuff.
Yeah,
But
because the damage has not been put on him at that point
right.
before it touches the immune effect.
Right.
So I'm not actually 100% sure. I feel like he couldn't innately, but I could be mistaken.
Okay. I feel like because it's the cost of a player card, it's not an actual player card. It's you're just paying the cost of a player card that maybe you could. But what I'll do is I'll put a little rule thing here. We have Albert, who's always our rules adjudicator during playthroughs. So I'll put a rule thing here. I'll look it up and find out what the community says. Ted, I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll wrap up this show because I think that this card isn't rocket surgery when you look at it. I think the elegance of the card is when you play it and knowing when to play it, so that and I think that we covered that pretty well. But I think another thing is, when is this card most effective? Is it an early game, late game, mid game? Like, I have my ideas, but I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, that's nope. Yes, great questions. Yes, great questions about when to apply the card.
Yeah.
And it's tough because early game, you need cards, you need tools to build your board state. But early game, you might not be able to afford exhausting your heroes because you don't have a board state built up yet. So early game, this card can be tough to pull off. It's more like a mid-game card, like a couple turns in when you maybe have an ally or two that can make up for your hero's action being lost. But that's where an effect to ready your hero is really important. Or like I said, if you're playing Boromir, he really, really mitigates this cost. Same with Bond of Friendship. They really mitigate the higher cost of exhaustion. So it's more of a mid-game card, but you can get away with it early game if you have maybe some of those tricks in your deck. And that's tend to where this card fits in the best.
Yeah, and I'm going to totally agree with you. I'm not even going to wait for you to ask, because I'm going to say that this card probably makes the most sense turn 3, turn 4, barring any sort of weird readying effects that you were talking about. Not even weird, just readying effects, because even if you play Fast Hitch in the first round and you're playing a Hobbit deck, you play Fast Hitch in the first round, you're probably not going to have another lore resource to play it during the refresh phase anyways. Mm-hmm. So, now you're in round 2 and you have to wait for the second round, and then you have to wait all the way to the end of the second round to play it. And then in that round, you may not want to play it, because you already have the ability to take a mulligan at the beginning to get the cards that you want. So, like you said, this card may kind of it almost doubles your starting hand. But I think that when you get to turn 3 or turn 4 and you've kind of played those initial cards and your board state is kind of set up, this is what you need in order to push your board state, beyond where it needs to, where you want it to be. This is the draw that ringmail, draw the second unexpected courage, draw another Fast Hitch, all those cards that are going to boost your board state, but not necessarily needed right there at the beginning. So it's a turn 3, turn 4 card.
As the card pool has grown too, there's so many more ways to ready your hero. Like there's such a ridiculous amount of ways. You have Mirivor, you have Magic Ring, Oh, actually, another hero I forgot to mention too that has self-writing is Khalil.
Khalil. Right.
Khalil's ability is he can discard a Harad ally from your hand to ready Harad in play, which includes himself. So you can exhaust him, draw 5 cards, and if you draw Harad ally, you can pitch one of those to ready him if you need him for the next turn. And you still got 4 cards. Like
right.
For one, that's still pretty good.
Yeah.
Seems okay.
Right. Seems okay. That's like your tagline now. Seems okay.
Oh, Quick Beam. Hero Quick Beam. He can deal 2 damage to ready himself.
Right.
Like Elving, like there's so many reading effects, right? We could have a whole episode on that. And
you can't use leadership Frodo because that has to be another questing character. So FYI.
Yes. So be careful.
Like leadership
some of the reading
Aragorn,
effects don't synergize. It has to be like a really blanket, non-conditional reading effect. But then you get 5 new cards and you'll be so happy you did.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we talk about how important defense is in terms of playing the game. I think in terms of setting up your game, I think that card draw may be one of the best effects that you need in order to make your deck work, right? Like we need defense on the board, but in order to continually beat scenarios and be good, you probably need some sort of card drawing engine where you're drawing cards consistently besides just drawing them every one a turn. Top decking is really not a good way to go about. Top decking, for anybody who's new to the community or new to card games, is when because at the beginning of every turn you're able to draw a card, and so you're drawing a card off the top of your deck. And so if that's the only card draw you have, it's probably going to be very tough to win a lot of the scenarios in the game.
Right.
So
but oddly enough, this shouldn't be the only card draw in your deck. But if it's the only card draw you play for the whole game, it's pretty sufficient. Like I said, in a 10-turn game, you drew an extra 5 cards. That's very helpful. If it's the only card draw you end up playing because you didn't draw any more.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, there's not a ton to say about. There's not a ton more to say about this, except at the end here, I am going to mention the art. This is one of those lesser-known Magali Villanueva art pieces, which is phenomenal. And on first glance, it looks like Bilbo looking out the window. But then when you look, he's actually sitting by his fireplace. And the details of him sitting by the fireplace, just reading... I would like to think it's the Red Book of Westmarch, but it doesn't have to be. Just sitting there thinking and talking about stuff. It's good. It's kind of reflective of his time in Rivendell. So
and if you want to get real thematic, you could play a spare pipe, which lets you search the top 5 cards of your deck for an event, and you may find this card, and then play Smoke and Think, which is an action to reduce the cost by the number of pipes you have. So with 1 spare pipe, you could play Smoke and Think to have peace and thought. Just saying.
Except you can't do that, Ted.
You can't? Why not?
Because you can only play this card in the refresh phase. You can't do it during planning phase.
Well, yeah, but you can do that all. You can spare pipe and then have... You have to have all the cards in your hand, but I'm saying it's possible to...
Yeah, you can sneak Bilbo into play. Go find your spare pipe with Bilbo. But you can't put spare pipe into play. It only goes into your hand.
Well, I mean, during the planning phase, you can.
Not spare pipe,
yeah.
Hobbit pipe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Super thematic. And I'm going to ruin...
Smoke and Think. I'm saying you can use Smoke and Think to pay for peace and thought.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why I'm thinking. I must have not been listening to you. You're right, because you can play all those events. They're all events,
Think is
right?
just an action. Yeah, but just an action event to just reduce the cost of something. So
right.
You can smoke and think that peace and thought. That's all I wanted to say.
Yes, you can
But
definitely.
let's ring this bad boy.
Let's ring this bad boy. As always, I'm wrong. But Ted, just in case you have forgotten or may not have
Mind me.
ever paid attention, we have a highly arbitrary yet scientific system where we rank a card on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card to rule them all, and 10 is the card that we throw back into the fiery chasm from whence it was made. So, Ted, I think the last time we did one of these just you and me shows without Grant, I think I made you go first, so I am going to go first this time.
Yeah, because I'm making you.
That's so I'm going to smoke and think my way into a peace and thought. But I think for card draw, this is all right. I think that it balances out the cost of the exhausting 2 heroes by giving you so many cards. 5 cards. Like, that's phenomenal. And of course, we mentioned all those ways that you can get around having to exhaust those heroes or, having to use those heroes. But I think that there's other card draw that isn't so pricey. And I feel like sometimes 5 cards, I don't know. What do I want to say? It's like win more. Does that make sense? Like this card, if you're playing in round 8 or 9 when your board state is all, I guess if you're still playing in round 8 or 9, you may still just need a card, right? So I don't know. There's
down to one
right.
card. Just it'll replenish your entire hand if you top deck it.
Yeah, I know, and I get that. But I think the cost is a lot for card draw, and it's real finicky compared to other card draw effects. But that said, you balance out that card draw is maybe one of the most important functions of your deck, and that really pushes this card up to a higher tier card in my book. So while this isn't necessarily an auto include, like people auto include Daron's Runes because it's 0 cost and it will net you a card, right? And people automatically include Drinking Song, and people automatically include both Daron's Runes and in Drinking Song in a deck because the card draw is so strong and you need it. This doesn't necessarily get auto included as a card draw option. So all of that long drawn out thing is for me to say that I think that this is still, because it's card drawn so important and because it works so nicely in a Bond of Friendship deck, I think that this is like got to be a 4 for me. So it's a card that I will include in a lot of Bond of Friendship decks, but I'm going to rely on other types of card draw outside of a Bond of Friendship deck. But I think card draw is that important that I'm not going to give it like a 7 or an 8 because of its limited reasonability usage, especially playing solo. I exhaust 2 of my 3 heroes, then that playing solo, that's really crippling.
Yeah, in multiplayer, sometimes other players can sort of pick up the weight. If you discuss, you're like, hey, I'm going to exhaust 2 of my questers. Can you help us, help with that next turn? If I maybe then get more cards for healing and other thing, yeah, it can be mitigated certainly in multiplayer. And solo, it can be harder. I agree.
Right. So what do you think? I thought you were going to continue talking about what you
It is a struggle because that cost is still so high that even in my lore decks, I don't just like, I'm going to put in Peace and Thought because you can't always afford to exhaust. And sometimes even in your lore decks, you don't always have the writing effects too. So as much as I love this card, I was actually going to kind of put it middle of the road at 5. And it's really close to 4. I think I almost went with 4 because I think that's somewhere in 4 and 5 is appropriate because it's so powerful though when you do, but got to have the hero lineup with the sphere to really kind of make sure you can afford it.
I think it's also a feel good card too. When
It
you can
feels
play it, because
so
it doesn't seem to be finicky, but it just feels good to be able to draw 5 cards, and you have your refresh action. You're like, oh, I've set this up, and like I know how to play it because it's it is a refresh action, so it just feels good when you play it. Okay, well,
Yep.
There we have it. We have Peace and Thought. A shout out to our community member John Rogers from Con of the Rings. Not intentionally, but definitely coincidentally doing this for him. I don't know. We don't dedicate episodes usually, but here we are talking
Community comes up. Look, it's a community game.
It is a community game. That's what happens when it's cooperative. So, and Grant, it's we always miss Grant when he's not on the show, and I think he would have enjoyed talking about this.
He's having some peace and thought of his own.
Yeah, peace and thought as he's snoring right next to Katie. So, anyways, everybody out there, join us again as we talk about more cards from the game. Have a great day.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube. And there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.